Actually, just going to hand over to Kate in the first instance. Kate is the Principal Clinician Social Worker and has a lived experience of working with families following brain injury. And then we're very fortunate to have Dean, who is a husband and a father of 4 children. His wife Cheryl had a brain injury some 12 years ago now, and I've done a lot of work with Dean in terms of our research, and I'll come back in and talk about where to from here at the end.
Thank you all for having us. So we have run a pilot study where we interviewed 26 participants. 10 of those were adults, 16 were children aged 5 to 18, and we wanted to understand their experiences and their recommendations of the support that should be provided. After the analysis, we ended up with 4 themes, which I'll go through briefly for you. So our first theme was help parents to help their children. So parents confirmed that the clinicians were solely focused on the person with an ABI, and they didn't feel that there was enough support offered to them to provide them with support, not only for themselves, but how did they support their children. So parents struggled to understand the enormity of the situation, as well as the diagnoses, and they wanted to know really what to tell the children. They didn't want to tell them everything, and they didn't want to tell them nothing, and there was a big gap in the middle there. Our second theme was to give children meaningful roles. So children emphasised their desire to want to be included and involved by staff members and their families, and this was a way that children felt really valued and important in the process. So the older children wanted to understand the perspectives of not only the injured person but the non-injured parent, which provided them insight into some of the difficulties that they were experiencing. And children talked to us about, some of the changes not only within their families and their roles, but they wanted to create some positive bonds with their families. So by being given meaningful roles, this actually assisted the children, or they felt it would assist with their adjustment. Our third theme was for staff not to leave children in the dark. So all children that we interviewed stated that even though they had questions, they didn't ask anybody. And this was because they didn't know what to ask, who to ask, and they felt that their questions might be silly. So a 6-year-old told me that if she had a question, she just normally kept that in her head. The main question that was asked by children is, when will daddy be home? And what children explained was that by feeling like they were left in the dark, their minds were really festering, and just not knowing the information was actually worse. Our fourth theme was support for children is not one size fits all. So the younger children wanted to know more generic information about the brain and how it works. So they also wanted to hear peer stories, such as how did other children feel and what did they experience. Whereas the older children, they wanted more candid information. They wanted to know what was the diagnoses, how can this potentially impact on our family and myself, etc. And parents affirmed exactly what the children had said, and the parents wanted to engage children in a way that they were learning without realising that they were learning. And what was recommended is that the development of applications, educational videos and interactive games was, best practice moving forward. So with all of this information, we've started the process of developing an interactive game specifically for adolescents. What we've done is we've separated the game into 6 different worlds, which can be seen here. So world number 1 explains the brain and how it works. World number 2 details what happens to the brain and when it's injured, and how the severity of an injury might provide some recovery predictions. World number 3 identifies different emotions and it aims to help children to understand what they might be feeling. World 4 identifies and promotes healthy coping and different strategies. World 5 explains the roles of professionals and how children can work effectively with them, and the emphasis of linking with supports and accessing supports. And world number 6 really brings it all together. So even though a child's world can be changed and altered, there can still be beautiful and meaningful memories made with their families. So that leads in nicely to Dean. Thank you.
Yes, good morning everybody. Thank you for letting me speak today. As you can see, that's my wife, but there's 4 people that are missing from that photo, and that's my children. And I was asked to talk about how this research is important for people with brain injury. And the best way I could probably do that is tell you 2 short stories. And the first one is on the day of my wife's accident. We're in intensive care. The doctors are talking to us as a family, explained they had to remove 6% of her left front lobe of her brain. And we're going through what that caused and all. But my youngest son kept on saying to me, "What did they do, Dad?" And he'd asked the doctors as well. 6% of the front left lobe had been removed. And then I realised, to know what 6% of something you don't even know the size of and what it does is an irrelevant answer to say it's only 6%. So I got the surgeons to actually draw it on a piece of paper. And straight away, he understood. So this research is not only building tools, but it's also going to educate us in the right language to use with kids. But probably the biggest story I can tell you, and it's very emotional, I'm very passionate about this, is at the time I had a 16-year-old son, and he was going through his HSC, learning to drive when his mum had his accident. She had her accident. He, many years later, was having a few problems with his study at uni and things like that. And you've got to remember, when Cheryl had her accident, there was less than a 10% chance she was going to survive. She was in intensive care for 6 weeks. We didn't think she was going to live for probably close to 4 to 5 of those weeks. And there was a lot of emotions. Well, when he was 19, he broke down one day in his bedroom, just a big mess. And I couldn't work out what was going on. And then I got told by him when I sat down with him on the floor and gave him a cuddle, he hated himself. And I said, "Why do you hate yourself?" And he goes, "Because when Mum was really, really sick and close to dying, I thought it was time for me to say to her, 'Mum, you can't fight anymore, you can give up life.'" And he said that to his mum, and he felt guilty for that. And he felt angry, and he didn't know how to cope with that. And it took many, many years of him going through, talking to people, and us explaining that as a family, we all said the same thing to her. And yes, he's fine now. He's just turned 30, he's engaged, talking about children and all that. But that has been a really, really long process. And with these tools, we may have picked those up, or we may have gave him the skills to be able to then open up to us a lot earlier. So I think this piece of work is very important, not just for the clinicians, the staff, and right down to even the cleaning staff, who are a big, important part of also the development of brain injury patients as well, but also for the families, the children, and even now that we have grandchildren, some of these tools I would like to use my grandchildren. They don't understand what brain injury. They understand, Nan, she's in a wheelchair, Nan can't do all the normal things and all, but they'd be things that will help them understand what we're going through. It's very hard to explain to a 7-year-old what a brain injury is. All right, thank you.
Just really briefly, what are we going to do now? Well, we're going to be working with clinicians in intensive care and in the brain injury services to sort of understand what are the barriers to implementing some of this work. We're then going to be doing some co-design with consumers. We're going to be asking children and asking families, what should this technology look like? And we're going to ask them to actually be involved with us in testing the equipment and making sure that it is usable, that it actually does make a difference. And we'll be following that up with some usability studies or some feasibility studies where we provide these tools, and then we see whether it actually does help people's adaptability, their resilience, and their quality of life. So that's what the future's looking like.